Welcome to the Boom Bap Kingdom. Yo, peace and welcome to the Boom Bap Kingdom. We're here and we're super chilling, and I hope you guys are chilling too. First off, yo, I want to give all the viewers, new subscribers, I want to give everybody a super quick shout out. It's really cool to see you guys watching the videos, chiming in on the comments. All of that is really dope. We're just building community here, and I really appreciate that for sure. Check out the boombapkingdom.com for drum loops, samples, etc. Check out the new podcast, What's in the Backpack. New episodes are going to be dropping on a more consistent schedule. Hopefully every 2 weeks. I'll keep you guys posted on that for sure. But today, I just wanted to talk about vintage gear and the use of it. Now, a while back, I'm not going to front, I made a video about vintage gear and if vintage gear makes your beats better. And I believe I said no, not really in that video. But the context of that video, where I was coming from, really had to do with the sonics, right? That argument of sonics, because if you learn how to EQ and certain little tricks, you can have very high-end modern gear and create that 12-bit aesthetic from back in the day. There's just little tricks to that. However, as I was really thinking about this, I realized that owning one or two pieces of vintage gear absolutely can make you a better producer, better beat maker. And this is why. I started with the Ensoniq series of samplers, the Ensoniq EPS keyboard, the EPS M, and then the rack mount. I think the first one I got was the 16 rack mount. So I had the keyboard, I had an EPS M rack mount, then I got a 16 rack mount, and then I got an MPC 60. The thing that those samplers had in common was, in those days, there were no waveforms for you to edit on screen, nothing like that. Everything was really by ear, because it just had weird numbers, right? A start number, an end number. In some cases, when the firmware got the feature, you could take like the middle of the sample, make that the start, and the end the beginning. You could kind of swap things around, but it was all based on numbers. There was no cut and paste. There was no waveforms, nothing like that. So you were forced to really listen with your ear. But as I was thinking about it, I said, wow, you know what? It's that skill set of learning how to listen to the sample, learning how to fine-tune edit, learning how to pitch, learning when to filter, what type of filter to use. This is all happening strictly by ear, especially when we get into editing, like the start and the end of the sample. So I say all of that to say this: when I went back and I was discussing sonics, yeah, you know, modern machines, definitely you can create the sonic aesthetic that you're looking for with the modern machines and tools, plugins, whatever. But that skill of listening to the sample as opposed to looking at it, I think what's happening nowadays, and this even comes down to mixing, when you're mixing your songs, a lot of people are visually stimulated, but they're not audibly stimulated. So we're teaching our eyes to mix and edit for us, and our ears are not as good anymore because we're looking at screens and waveforms, and we're not listening to how things actually sound when we do certain things. So, does the vintage gear make you better? I think yes, it does in hindsight, but from strictly using your ears as opposed to using your eyes, it will make you better. Moving away from the screens will make you better. Even if I'm mixing, turning off the displays and not actually looking at the DAW and looking at the plugins, that's one of the reasons why I run a control surface, because I can push faders, I can turn knobs, and I'm not looking at what the plugin is doing. Because back in the days in a recording studio, you didn't have monitors, like, displays. You didn't have that stuff. So you had to use your ears. You had little tiny VU meters and stuff like that at the end of a channel strip. So I would say all of that to say this. One, in terms of mixing and mastering and stuff like that in your studio, if you can, try turning off the display and just using your ear when you're pushing levels, turning dials for EQ, whatever. If you can, get away from looking at the screen when you're doing that. That's going to make you better, in my opinion. You'll get that ear muscle memory back. In terms of making beats, I think investing in one piece of vintage gear that does not have waveforms on the screen for sample editing will also make you better. It'll make you better even like on the new gear, because you won't be looking at the screens so much. Because even on this new stuff, when you look at things like Machine Plus and Push 3, and the idea is to be tactile, to be hands-on, to get away from the computer, but there is still too much information on the screens, even on these kind of devices, because these devices are computers in and of themselves. They have full-blown Linux operating systems. They have all this information on the display. So if we can get away from that, go to something vintage that can give us the ear muscle memory that we lost from the fancy screens, it's going to make you better. So with that being said, if you could go back and purchase a vintage piece, what would it be? Would it be a 60? Would it be a 3000? Would it be an SP1200? Would you pick up an ASR 10? These are all dope machines that I know if you added to your workflow is gonna make you better. Get in those comments. Let me know what you think. And with that, I'll leave you with a BBK salute. Peace.